As Felicity said, I'm head of the Data Linkage Unit at the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. I sort of hope everybody knows who we are, but just very briefly, in case you don't, we're a government statutory authority established under our own Act, which is quite important because that Act has certain provisions in it which allow us to release data and sets up our own ethics committee which can approve the release of data for research. Basically our role is we hold a whole series of national databases in health and community services such as national hospitals, cancer registry, data on homelessness services, disability services, alcohol and drug services, so a whole range of... So we have, and I guess our prime role is to collate and manage and analyse and report on that data. And along with that, we have a big role in ensuring the consistency of data standards. So a lot of our data comes in from the states and is collated into a national collection, and we want that data to, usually as a minimum data set, which we talked about this morning, where you define what items you actually need and everybody agrees to provide those, and they're provided to a consistent definition. And we also have a role as an honest broker between the Commonwealth and the states in a lot of the provision of information for the Commonwealth state agreements. We've been actually doing data linkage since the mid-90s, and the National Death Index, which is a file which is specifically set up for data linkage, has been going for that time. So we've been doing data linkage to that and also to cancer data for a long time. And also data linkage within data collections, actually, so that where we're collecting data on services, for example, people who use disability services, you're actually getting records of service use. We want to link those together, records at a person level. So I have been doing it for a long time, but it was sort of spread throughout the Institute, and about 5 years ago the Data Linkage Unit was established to coordinate and the data linkage that was done by the Institute, and it was at a time when the demand for data linkage both internally and externally was increasing. And we have a number of characteristics of the Institute which are good for data linkage, in that we do have a strong privacy and confidentiality regime established under our Act, and of course another acts that we follow, obviously the Privacy Act. We have a detailed knowledge and experience with many of the national data sets, and I've just mentioned the three there, that National Death Index, Australian Cancer Database, and the National Diabetes Register, for which we actually do hold the personalised information and that we link regularly, but there's a whole series of others that we have linked, including in the community services as well as the health field. We have a lot of experience with dealing with data custodians, especially from the states, and that's a lot of our work, and we have to do that by persuasion rather than coercion. Yeah, so that's a very strong part of our work, keeping those links with the data custodians in the states and the Commonwealth. And we have the technical capability and resources for management and analysis of large complex data sets. So that's just on the Institute. So I'm going to talk about the new principles. Well, they're not so new now, they're about 2 or 3 years old, for Commonwealth data integration, and these are principles that have been signed up by all the secretaries of Commonwealth departments. So it's a Commonwealth-wide thing, although it has been led by the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Department of Health and Ageing, who are particularly interested in making their data available for research use, but are very, of course, concerned about the privacy and confidentiality implications. And the principles are set up, the drive behind them is to make better use of existing data and to get all the benefits of data linkage that I think everybody's starting to understand now, that you fill in data gaps where you're missing data in one data set, you can find it in another. Putting two or more data sets together obviously gives you a much richer information, and both so you can have a much richer data set to analyse, and you can also often follow people through, say, the health system, or look at outcomes after after operation, so forth, is the sort of thing you're trying to do, and there are a lot of opportunities for new ways of looking at things. And it also does give us better understanding of existing data, so when you often check one data set against another, you find that you're maybe not quite collecting what you thought you were. And that can often lead to improved data quality and, of course, hopefully, inform policy and practice. So there are 7 principles, and I'll just go through them briefly. There's only one that's probably important here. And if I can read. So it is based around using data strategically. Importantly, the data custodians still retain responsibility and control, as along the lines James mentioned, that it's up to the data custodian to approve how data is released and for what purposes. Of course, privacy and confidentiality are very important. This is all for statistical and research outcomes. And at the Institute, we're very aware of distinguishing the work we do and do for our external researchers as very distinct from the work that some departments might do within the Commonwealth and the state in actually tracing individuals for operational and administrative purposes. We're not obviously doing any of that. It should be for public benefit, obviously, and the operations are transparent, and part of that is that now every data linkage project that we do, we have up on our website explaining just briefly what it's about and what it's for and what's been approved. The principle 3, which I haven't mentioned yet, is the integrator's accountability, and the Institute has been accredited as a integrating authority for the integration of Commonwealth data, linkage of Commonwealth data. At present, there's only 2 of those. The other one is the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and because of the Act and that they work under, they don't have the same opportunities of releasing data that we do. And the important thing is that an integrating authority for the linkage of Commonwealth data must be identified for each statistical data integration proposal, and they'll be held responsible for the conduct of that proposal, that project, in line with the requirements that we've...
Do you have an ethical process?
Yeah, I'll explain in a moment. This is just so, and that means all these things. So an open approval process is followed. You've got to have good documentation. You've got to look at the impact on privacy, and there's a whole lot of stuff about assessing risks. I'll talk a little bit about that further, and what the cost and benefit outputs. And so the integrating authority is responsible for the ongoing management of the integrated data. So that gives us quite a lot of responsibility to ensure that the project is done properly and privacy and confidentiality are maintained. So we already had this in place before we were an integrating authority, and as we do have our own ethics committee established under our legislation, and they're basically mandated by that legislation to look at every linkage proposal and approve every linkage proposal. They'll also expect it to be approved by your home ethics committee and, of course, all the data custodians involved and any other ethics committees that you may have to apply to. And so, as most ethics committees do, they control what integration work can be done and for what purpose. So and make sure that it's a sound scientific purpose, and how the data is handled, stored and retained or deleted, whatever the case is. So we feel we've always had a high level of security of data, and we also practice the separation principle, and we've had a long history of developing methodology for the linkage of data sets, and now we're working with the CDL to further progress some of the finer points of that. We then did have to go through a whole quite rigorous application process, which was quite difficult for a small organisation like us, because we actually did have most things in place, but we had to document that we'd had them in place, which was the big challenge. But we have made one major shift we have made, is that now our data linkage work is now all carried out on a completely separate computer system to our main institute system. So it's separated. There's only one way in, which is controlled, and so that's just an extra degree of security. I mean, the institute as a whole has a whole range of security protocols, but that's an extra degree that we've now developed. Now, so the current state of play, is this the one I want? I think I've got, yeah, I think I've got one out of, that should be my last slide. So the important thing, one element of the principles are that risk is judged, and there's still a bit of discussion about exactly how the risk regime is going to be determined. There's been a few different iterations of the risk profile, but it actually comes down in the end to a judgment of the data custodian, which in the case of the Department of Health and Ageing will usually mean that if you're using something like MBS or PBS, they will judge it as high risk. And there's a different protocol for high risk projects than ones that are regarded as medium and low. It's probably important to stress here that the risk is not so much the risk of a breach occurring, so for example personal information being released, but it's from the Commonwealth point of view, and particularly the ABS point of view, the risk to the statistical system if a breach does occur. So Australian people's confidence in the collection of data, the census, for example, is a big one, if they are aware of a breach occurring in this project. And for high risk of projects, you have to have, like the Institute, you have to be authorised by legislation, which we are, to receive identifiable data, or it could be by consent, obviously. But you also need the legal protections prohibiting the disclosure of identifiable data, and that means actually that staff who release identifiable data illegally can actually go to jail. That's in our Act. It's never happened, of course, because we haven't had a breach, but that's the protection that the Commonwealth requires, which has been one of the issues for some organisations wanting to become integrating authorities. Now, data linkage under the integrating authority framework, there is a variation on the separation principle that we've heard about, in that the integrating authority can actually practice internal separation, so we still separate the identifiable data from the content data, but that can be done within the institute. And now that we have our new system, that is easier to ensure. And it actually means that we have roles within the data linkage unit, so that someone who's a linker on this project can't be an integrator or an analyst, because we do even have our own projects we're doing analysis as well. So it does mean that at least from the Commonwealth, for example, MBS data will come to the Institute to be put together and then made into the file to be used by the researcher. High-risk projects also are mandated to have a form of secure data access, and there are basically really only two ways you can achieve that. One is for people to come to the Institute and sit in a room and use the data in a special data laboratory, or in fact we can come out with a laptop. We've never done that, but that would be a possibility. And the other one is to actually use Shore, which we've talked about this morning. And just briefly though, it's a remote environment that you have to sign up for. And it's from the researchers I've spoken to who have used it, they find it really good because it's got all the statistical software in it, everything that you need, and for a lot of people it's better than their own university systems, for example. And you can access it from wherever you are, your home or your work. So what it ensures, just briefly, so that the full unit record data file is held within Shore. There may be some confidentialisation at the data custodian requires, but in a lot of cases that won't be any more than just stripping off the identifiable data. And so you have access to that to analyse it, do whatever you want with it, but what you bring out of that environment is controlled. And that's where the curated gateway here comes in. It is necessary for researchers who want to use it to go to do a one-day course, or I think it's going to be online now. Is that right? Yeah, online course. And there are some fees involved.
How much? That was been my question.
Yeah.
So there's several layers of fees, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's fees for
linkage, data, sure.
Oh no, if you're just talking about sure.
No, I'm just talking about Shores.
I want to
okay.
right now.
Yeah, I can speak about it. No, yeah, I've got 2 copies of this. So that's where we're up to, but everything's in a bit of a state of flux at the moment, we'd have to say. So the integrating authority infrastructure is in place, and the institute has become one. And there's a website explaining how it all happens at the National Statistical Service website. But at the moment there is no systematic application process to get a project started. There is an ad hoc sort of process, and there is a list of projects in the Department of Health and Ageing that are sort of going through various stages of approval. You'd have to say it's taking longer than most of us would like. We are currently, the Department of Health and Ageing has said they want the Institute to basically be the upfront body that receives applications and judges the feasibility of the linkage and the scientific worth, or first go at the scientific worth before they pass it on to the Department of Health and Ageing and before it goes through an ethics process. And that's what we're just currently developing, the sort of application forms that we'll use for that. They certainly want to outsource all that sort of work to us. We have been linking Commonwealth data sets, not as many as we'd like, but we have linked MBS. We've got a project just about to do PBS and the immunisation register for another one. And we can link Commonwealth to Commonwealth data sets, we can link Commonwealth to state. We have in fact acted like a state linkage unit in some cases and just linked state data. So, but there's a number of projects now that have been proposed and going for approval which actually involve both state linkage units and us, so to link some state data together and then pass over to identifies over us to add the Commonwealth data that's wanted. So there's a potential for lots of work to happen, but there's still a few things to be sorted out about how the process goes forward. And regardless of that, you'll still need the approvals that required will be from Department of Health and Ageing as a data custodian and their ethics committee, although we're hoping that eventually they'll accept the approval of the Institute Ethics Committee. As I said, we're mandated for any linkage project to go through our ethics committee by our legislation, and of course you'll need other custodian ethics committee approvals as appropriate. I should just say that we obviously, we're not funded to do data linkage. The Institute is only about a third core funded, the rest, which is, for example, mainly to collect hospital data and those very basic things and produce a couple of big reports. All our other work is on a project basis. And so the data linkage is similarly, we operate on a cost recovery basis.
Can I just ask a quick question? I'm from WA and there's been some data sets, there've been applications and we've got some Commonwealth data. And
I'll jump in there.
Yes.
WA did have an arrangement with the Department of Health and Ageing to link MBS and PBS data with WA administrative collections. That agreement has now come to an end, and these arrangements have superseded.
So it was a completely different track, right? So that's
they were
never involved in that part anyway. So that was long ago.
That was
was long ago.
Officially that process came to an end at the end of last year.
That's right.
Oh, sorry, MBS, PBS, yes. So through this MBS and PBS data, of course, they're the two big data sets that hopefully are being made available by this process. and we have done some data linkage with them. But as I'm saying, and there are now a number of applications for linkage to MBS and PBS, and in the latest round of NHMRC grants proposals, we've got a call every day about a possible project. So it is happening. But what I'm saying is that at the moment, because there is no systematic process, and we're still trying to work out with the Department of Health and Ageing how everything is going to be operationalised smoothly. Things aren't happening quickly. Yeah.
What would be your average timeline for someone that's submitted an application?
I don't think I'd like to say.
Can we?
Yeah.
First, I might just say, having been a bit involved in this, you guys have done a great job in terms of AIHW coming in, and the nightmare scenario, frankly, that we had probably 2 years ago. It's a great thing. So I wouldn't feel at all bad that things are. They've developed much further than I expected. So there's that. Now I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, which is price and cost. And I understand it's cost recovery. And part of what I'm asking for is not exact dollars, but is it going to be thousands, tens of thousands, that kind of question. And part of why I'm pushing is that's an important thing for someone who's a researcher to understand, to budget. If that's possible.
Well, I can say we do projects.
You won't have an answer now, but I'm saying.
Yeah, well, we do a whole range of projects that involve huge data sets to multi-data sets to. So we started, our minimum is probably $3,000 for if you're linking a small cohort to the National Death Index.
Sure. Okay.
But a medium-sized project might be 25,000, and that could go up to 100,000 if you're linking 5 data sets and there's millions of records.
Is it the number of data sets or the volume within each data set?
It's both. Yeah.
Right, so
it's often the size of the biggest data set because even if you've got a small cohort, if you want to link that to the whole of the PBS, we've got to use all those records.
And I would urge you to have something like that on your website, because so then when you put it into
well, we're still feeling our way a bit on our pricing because, to be honest, we have been in the past where it was a bit of an ad hoc industry. We were underpricing ourselves, and unfortunately, one of the biggest costs is the administration of rather than the linkage itself. So often the linkage can take, if it's a small linkage, it can take less time.
Well, look, it's probably the more important point to make around costs is at the moment it depends on the nature of your project, how many data collections, how many different jurisdictions those data collections come from.
That's true,
And there will be fees for the linkage, the data extraction, and for using Shore.
Yeah. So how much of that? Let's talk about Shore then. Any sense?
For Shore, they divide their fees into 2 parts. There's you have to register as a user, and there's a registration fee, and then there's a project fee. And again, it depends on the nature of the project.
They're also looking to deal with universities, aren't they? Where the university would pay a fee, which would cover at least your registration fee.
No, it's cool. Yeah. Okay, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
We'll probably come back to that later in some of our questions here. So I've got a question.
If you come back to the physical and ID security issues, you touched on the point that you're just going to a system where your data linkage is in a standalone system. And I know this is an evolving scene about what is secure and what the level of security is. And is that going to be the new standard, that linkage is going to be standalone from other access?
Well, it is in a number of linkage units already.
Okay.
So it's just coming up to that level.
Well, it's more a demonstration that we do take privacy and confidentiality seriously because we've our whole institute computer system is actually defence signal standard.
It comes down to the Australian standards and information security manual that the SKHRM put together, and the separate infrastructure allows audit of who's on that. It means the data's held together, it's not backed up with other data, and it means you can actually check who's been on it, what they've done, what changes they made, so it's fully auditable, and that was the challenge.
That's right. And you can actually completely delete it You know it's deleted. That's one of the important things.
So it's all the difficult things that you have to do in terms of normally an IT part of your organisation will deal with that separately, but they tend to do things like backup together and they do access in groups. This was a way of making sure that was all segregated out, totally in the control of the linkage unit.
Greater security for avoiding, hacker attacks and things like that too. It's not on the main system. Are there any other questions for this part of the talk? Can I just ask a question? You said that Australian Institute of Health and Welfare is a fairly small organisation. How many people, what's the manpower doing all this wonderful work?
Oh, it was about 10 to 12 of us in the data linkage unit.
Okay, that's good. But still, I can imagine that's,
some of those.
You guys will be stretched soon.
So some of the, well,
we'll have to grow.
We'll be glad.
All the keen beans in here with 100 projects.
We'll be glad when we're stretched. I think.
Yeah, can I just add that from the WA experience, the process from when you get your funding and you start your application, it can take you over a year to get your data. So just to know that. So
if you're lucky.
So it's the ethics process, then the data extraction, there's a queue for that, there's a priority listing, and then the ethics is